I never thought a coffee machine could feel like a confessional. But there I was, leaning against its chipped metal frame. The faint hum of its motor vibrating through the linoleum floor. Steam curled lazily around my face as I held my cup like a shield. My fingers tingling from the heat. Outside, Chicago's morning buzzed to life. Horns honked, bus engines coughed, and the city skyline shimmered gold through the early sunlight. But inside Blackstone Dynamics' Midtown Tower, the world was quieter. Too quiet, maybe. For 20 years, I had walked these halls, seen the same polished shoes shuffle past, heard the same empty congratulations, and smiled at the same hollow gratitude. I am Simone, black, proud, 38, and yet somehow, still invisible. They see my work, they see the results. The numbers balanced, the systems running, the payroll flawless. They don't see me. I take a sip. Bitter, too bitter. It matches the way I feel every morning. Overlooked. Uncelebrated. Erased. Facilities? The voice cuts through the air like glass breaking. I glance up. Rick Dalton, the new CEO. Sleek Italian suit, pressed and perfect, shoes that gleam like mirrors. Hair combed back, eyes hidden behind dark frames. A smirk touches his lips. The kind that makes you want to shrink. Fold into yourself. Good morning, Simone, I say, forcing a smile that tastes like ash. He chuckles, not unkindly, but not warmly. Facilities, right? I nod, lips pressed tight. Not, Simone. Not, the woman who just saved your entire payroll department from collapsing last quarter. Just, facilities. My body stiffens, but I nod, coffee in hand. I retreat to my corner. The break room feels smaller today. Somehow colder. I watch him glide past. The sound of his shoes echoing like a metronome I can't match. A metronome for someone who doesn't exist here. For someone they don't see. I've spent 20 years in this office. Building systems from scratch. Patching payroll errors at midnight. Covering for colleagues who forgot their responsibilities. Staying late to meet deadlines that never mattered to anyone except me. I've been the silent backbone of this corporation. The shadow no one noticed until something went wrong. But that morning, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was Rick's smirk. Or maybe it was the way the sunlight hit the polished floors and made me feel like a reflection I couldn't reach. Something tightened in my chest. A coil of determination and rage that had been quietly growing for decades. I was tired of being invisible. I made my way to my desk, passing cubicles where my colleagues pretended not to see me. My computer hummed softly, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I sank into my chair, dragging my fingers over the keyboard like a pianist warming up. Emails, spreadsheets, schedules, all of it laid bare in front of me. I watched the little glitches and inconsistencies in the system. The tiny errors that no one else would catch. And I smiled. I had always smiled, because my work spoke for me, even if no one else did. My phone buzzed. A message from Tanya, my old friend from our. Coffee later? You look stressed. I stared at it, tension coiled in my stomach. I wanted to reply. You have no idea. But I didn't. I swallowed hard and typed. Later. I had learned the rules here. Speak little, observe more, smile when necessary, let the work speak, because words were cheap, but results, they were priceless. The morning dragged, meetings blurred together, a parade of nodding heads and polite applause. I sat at the table, laptop open, taking notes, pointing out inconsistencies that no one acknowledged. Rick was at the head of the table, regaling everyone with his latest ideas, his latest schemes, and I could feel the room humming with approval. I wondered if he even knew who I was. Simone, can we get a quick report on the payroll exception logs? A colleague asked. Hesitating, as if asking me was an uncomfortable confession. I nodded. Already done. Sent to your inbox at 7:02 a.m. No acknowledgement. No, thank you. Just a quiet shuffle of papers. I sighed, swallowing the sting. It had been like this for 20 years. Invisible. Indispensable. Ignored. The sun reached its peak outside, and I watched the reflection of the city in the glass walls. Feeling a strange combination of awe and emptiness. This city had seen me rise. And yet, it didn't notice. By lunch, The cafeteria was alive with chatter. But I sat alone, tray in hand, eyes scanning a newspaper I wasn't reading. My mind wandered through memories, late nights in this same office. Working while friends celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, graduations. I had missed so much. And for what? For a company that saw me as a shadow. A placeholder. A background hum in their corporate symphony. A laugh cut through my thoughts. Rick, sitting at a nearby table with his new team. The ones who nodded at his every word. I watched him lean back, tossing a perfectly crisp dollar bill on the table, and felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years, fury. It wasn't just anger. It was recognition that my loyalty had been weaponized against me. My patience had been taken for granted. My brilliance overlooked. And yet, I had endured, silently, like a storm contained. Back at my desk, I stared at my reflection in the monitor. Simone, they don't see you. They see your work. But work can be stolen. Loyalty can be ignored. But knowledge is mine. Every glitch I've fixed, every memo I've saved, every irregularity I've noted, mine. I clenched my fists. This wasn't a moment of despair. It was ignition. The invisible years, the unseen labor, the quiet competence, they were all pieces in a puzzle no one else could assemble. I could feel it now. A plan forming, fragile but undeniable, like a whisper that grows into a roar. I had been invisible for 20 years. But invisibility is powerful. You can observe, you can learn, you can prepare, and when the time comes, the invisible hand can become unstoppable. The day dragged into evening. Colleagues filed out. The office lights dimmed, leaving me in a pool of artificial white light. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, staring at the empty cubicles. My pulse had slowed, but my mind raced. I could feel the city beyond these walls, alive, waiting, full of possibility. Simone, you think, this isn't over. This is just the beginning. Tomorrow, maybe, they'll see you, or maybe not, doesn't matter, because tomorrow, you are no longer just the invisible years. You are every late night, every unnoticed effort, every silent victory. And soon, very soon, they will notice. I woke up that morning with a sense of unease I couldn't shake. Chicago was gray, drizzling, the kind of weather that seeps into your bones and makes every step feel heavier. I pulled my coat tight around me, coffee thermos in hand, and walked to Blackstone Dynamics. The city moved around me in a blur. Umbrellas bobbing, taxis splashing puddles, people hurrying past, but I moved slower, thoughtful, deliberate. By the time I reached my floor, the office was buzzing, louder than usual, phones ringing, keyboards clattering, whispers bouncing off the polished walls. Something was off. My gut tightened as I passed the receptionist's desk. "Morning, Simone," she said nervously, her voice quieter than usual. "Morning," I replied, noting the tension in her shoulders. I didn't have time for pleasantries. I sat at my desk and opened the system. My fingers flew over the keyboard, scanning the overnight logs, pulling reports, analyzing exceptions, and then I saw it. A glitch. Not just any glitch, a catastrophic one. A payroll error that had gone unnoticed for 2 months. Quietly siphoning bonuses, misallocating salaries, creating discrepancies that could implode department budgets. And it wasn't random. It had the signature of someone tampering with the system. Someone with access. Someone careful. My heart pounded. Sweat prickled at my temples. This was dangerous, political, career-ending if handled wrong. But it was also an opportunity. A door that had been quietly waiting for me to notice it. I ran the logs again. Every entry, every correction, every failed login attempt. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. And they didn't know I knew. The office door opened, snapping me out of my focus. Rick Dalton stepped in, perfectly timed, his smile as polished as his Italian loafers. "Simone," he said, casual, "got a minute?" I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I had learned to mask everything, anger, suspicion, triumph, everything. "I need your eyes on something," he said, guiding me to a corner office with glass walls. "Confidential, only you and I." I followed. Every instinct screamed caution, but curiosity pushed me forward. Inside, He tapped a laptop, bringing up a spreadsheet. The numbers jumped out at me immediately. See these discrepancies? He asked, leaning over. Payroll anomalies. It's troubling. I didn't blink. I've noticed some irregularities in the logs. I said, calm, measured. I can trace the source if you'd like. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. You think someone is manipulating the system? Yes, I said, soft but firm, but it's fixable. Rick smiled, no warmth. Just that smirk that always made me feel both invisible and exposed. Good, I trust you'll handle it quietly. Handle it quietly. Handle it quietly. Those words lingered in my mind long after I left his office. Handle it quietly, as if the weight of fixing months of sabotage, protecting the company's reputation, and shielding the culprits was my responsibility alone. But I didn't feel like a scapegoat. I felt alive. I spent the morning tracing the code, analyzing logs, contacting IT support under the guise of routine checks. Every step revealed more unauthorized access points, hidden backdoors, encrypted messages that only someone with insider knowledge could have left. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate, and whoever had done it thought they were clever. By lunchtime, I had a profile, someone high up, someone trusted, someone who would never imagine that Simone, the invisible, the overlooked, would find the key. I stepped out for a sandwich, my mind racing faster than my feet could carry me. I replayed scenarios, anticipating questions, defenses, lies. By the time I returned, my pulse had steadied, but my plan had crystallized. I wasn't just going to fix this glitch. I was going to expose it. Strategically, carefully. The invisible years had taught me patience, observation, timing, and now, timing was everything. Back at my desk, Tanya slid a note across. Coffee. Now. Urgent. I smiled faintly. Tanya had always known when I was on the edge of something significant. We met in the dimly lit cafe across the street. She leaned in, voice low. You found it, didn't you? I did, I said, eyes steady. It's worse than I thought. Someone high up, someone who thinks they're untouchable. Her eyes widened. Simone, this is dangerous. People have lost careers, reputations, everything. I know, I said, which is exactly why it has to be me. We spent the next hour mapping out possibilities. Tanya was brilliant, resourceful, cautious. Together, we outlined a strategy. Document everything. Build evidence. Anticipate defenses. Protect allies. Every detail mattered. One misstep, and everything I had built, the invisible years, the trust I had quietly earned, would vanish. But the thrill of possibility surged through me. For the first time in 2 decades, I felt seen, not by the office, not by Rick, but by myself, and that was powerful. By late afternoon, I was back at my desk. The office hummed around me. Unaware, Rick passed by, smiling politely, oblivious to the storm building in the cubicle just beyond his reach. I traced the anomalies again. Careful, deliberate, precise. Every log entry, every failed login, every misallocated salary, I captured it all. And then, a moment of clarity. I could turn the tables. This glitch wasn't just a problem, it was leverage. Proof. A key to finally shifting the balance. The invisible years had taught me strategy. I was ready. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles as the fluorescent lights flickered. The city outside grew dark. The rain heavier. Simone, you think, this is your moment, not just to correct, not just to expose, but to reclaim. To show them all who you really are. Tomorrow, the first move, and they won't see it coming. The morning light cut through the blinds of my apartment like a blade. I didn't need an alarm. Anticipation had me wide awake. Mind spinning, heart drumming a rhythm that matched the storm inside me. Today, I was no longer just observing. No longer just tracing errors. Today, I would act. Blackstone Dynamics felt different as I walked in. The air was heavier, charged with the unspoken. The usual office chatter seemed muted, almost respectful, as if the building itself knew something was about to shift. I reached my desk and set up 2 laptops, a recorder, stacks of files. Tanya had spent the night helping me map every angle, every loophole, Every potential escape the saboteur might use. It wasn't just strategy, it was chess. Every move had to be precise, calculated, untraceable. And I had learned over the years that being underestimated was my advantage. People didn't see me, they never did, until now. By 10 a.m., the first target walked in, Rick Dalton. He was late, like always, hair perfectly slicked back, his smile as practiced as a lawyer's closing argument. He passed my desk without a glance, unaware of the storm that had been quietly assembling just inches from his polished shoes. I waited. Patience was critical. One misstep and my plan would crumble. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Ready. I opened the payroll system under my own credentials, tracing the path of the glitch back to its origin. Every unauthorized login, every encrypted modification, it all led to one terminal, one machine, and conveniently, it was in Rick's office. I took a breath, steadying the storm of adrenaline. The silent strike had to be clean, invisible, effective. I sent Tanya a text. Phase 1 ready. Confirm? Her reply came almost instantly. Green. Execute carefully. I approached Rick's office under the guise of needing a signature on a routine report. He barely looked up, too absorbed in his phone. I placed the files on his desk and leaned in. Subtle, calm, unassuming. Rick, there's something unusual I found in the payroll logs, I said softly, letting my voice be casual but carrying an unmistakable authority. I think you'll want to see this. He glanced up, eyebrows lifting, curiosity flickering in his eyes for just a moment. That moment was all I needed. I excused myself, retreating to the nearest corner, pulling up a remote access tool Tanya had prepped. Within minutes, I had duplicated the evidence, clean, untraceable, indisputable, every discrepancy, every misallocation, every shadow of manipulation, captured. And it was time-stamped, authenticated. Rick could not deny it. The rest of the day was a blur of subtle maneuvers. I made anonymous tips to our, forwarded sanitized evidence to compliance, and planted strategic breadcrumbs that would ensure the trail led directly to Rick. Every move was silent, invisible, yet deliberate. I watched, from my cubicle, as subtle panic began to ripple through his team. Whispers, nervous glances, hurried meetings behind closed doors. Rick remained composed, but the cracks were forming, and I smiled quietly to myself. By 3 p.m., my plan reached its first climax. The internal audit team, prompted by my careful nudges, called an emergency meeting. Rick, confident and smug, entered the conference room expecting routine protocol. What he didn't expect was the room packed with auditors. And Tanya, my silent ally, smiling faintly but knowingly. Rick, the lead auditor began, voice firm, professional. We've been reviewing payroll discrepancies and unauthorized system access. I watched from the doorway as realization dawned on his face. Slowly, painfully, that smirk, once untouchable, faltered. The room's energy shifted, electric and tense. Rick tried to speak, to explain, to deny, but every word faltered against the mountain of evidence I had orchestrated. Later, back at my desk, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The silent strike was complete. I hadn't raised my voice, caused a scene, or drawn attention, yet the power balance had shifted. I had become visible, not in the eyes of Rick, but in the eyes of the system, the company, and most importantly, myself. Tanya slid a cup of coffee across the desk. No words, just a knowing look. Simone, she said finally, voice low. That was perfect. I nodded, sipping the bitter liquid, letting the warmth spread. Perfect is nothing. Sustainable is everything. This isn't over. That evening, the city skyline bled into my apartment windows, the lights reflecting off rain-slicked streets. I sat at my laptop, reviewing the day's events, emails, logs, subtle acknowledgments from our, quiet nods from colleagues who had noticed but couldn't speak. They all confirmed it. My strike had hit the mark. And yet, I knew the bigger battles were coming. Because in a world where power is invisible, trust is currency, and loyalty is tested daily. One clean move is only the beginning. I had opened a door, but I had yet to walk fully through it. I leaned back in my chair, eyes closing briefly. Simone, I thought. This is just the first strike. The silent strike. The groundwork for everything to come. And when the final move is made, the office won't just know you exist, they'll remember it. Tomorrow, I would plan phase 2. And when it comes, it will be louder, bolder, undeniable. The day after the silent strike, the office felt different. The subtle tension that had been creeping through the floors was now visible. Almost tangible. It wasn't just Rick who was affected, his circle of allies. The ones who had thrived in the shadows were shifting uneasily, and I was invisible, observing, calculating, learning. As I walked past the break room, whispers stopped, conversations froze mid-laughter, eyes flickered toward me, quick glances that betrayed recognition, suspicion, maybe even admiration. It was intoxicating. I had expected retaliation, of course. But what I hadn't anticipated was how quickly the ripple would move through the hierarchy. Like a stone thrown into still water. Patterns changed, schedules were adjusted, teams that had once been siloed began talking. Cautiously, nervously, trying to piece together who had caused the disturbance. At 9 a.m., I found myself in an impromptu meeting with Tanya and 2 other colleagues who had noticed the anomalies in payroll but hadn't yet been implicated in anything. Their faces were tense, eyes darting, hands clasped tightly around coffee cups. "Simone, we're worried," whispered Malik, one of the junior analysts. "If Rick finds out you were behind this." I held up a hand. "No one knows," I said. My voice was calm, almost soothing, but beneath it lay an undercurrent of fire. "Right now, we're shadows. Shadows watch. Shadows move. Shadows decide. Let's keep it that way. Carefully." Tanya nodded. "You've changed the game. Everyone's walking on eggshells. And it's beautiful to watch." Beautiful, indeed, but I knew better than to get carried away by the spectacle. Power is fleeting. Awareness is fragile. And in corporate warfare, visibility can be a weapon, and a target. By mid-morning, subtle victories began to emerge. Rick's credibility had taken a hit. Colleagues who once feared him were now cautiously testing boundaries. I watched from the sidelines as a senior manager, someone who had never challenged Rick, quietly questioned a decision he made in a meeting. The tiny act of defiance was amplified by the invisible hand of my work, the evidence I had planted, the audits I had triggered. I felt a surge of satisfaction, tempered by caution. This was no longer about a single strike. It was about momentum, about creating a ripple that would grow until the foundations Rick and his cronies had built for themselves were unstable, shaking, questioning their own authority. But the ripple wasn't all positive. Shadows have edges, and sometimes, those edges cut back. I noticed subtle shifts in behavior that worried me. Tanya received an anonymous note slipped under her office door, cryptic, menacing. Malik's workstation was suddenly bugged with unnecessary audits and monitoring. The office cameras felt more vigilant. I realized then that every action I took created reactions. Visible and invisible, intended and unintended. Corporate revenge is a dance with consequences, some of them silent. Creeping, waiting to strike back. And yet, I refused to be afraid. Lunch came, a rare moment of reflection. I sat alone in the cafeteria, watching the ebb and flow of employees navigating the new tension. I could see the stress lines forming, the small gestures of panic, the subtle repositioning of power. Each movement confirmed that my actions had been the pebble that set the waves in motion. I opened my laptop and drafted a series of contingency plans. Phase 2 wasn't just about Rick anymore, it was about the ecosystem he had built. Allies, enablers, silent participants, they all had roles to play. And I would, piece by piece, dismantle the network that had allowed corruption and manipulation to thrive for years. By 3 p.m., the first signs of fear in Rick became impossible to ignore. He walked past my desk, head lowered, smile gone. His usual confidence had eroded. His aura of control was punctured by something invisible but undeniable. And yet, he tried to maintain appearances. I caught the twitch in his jaw, the slight tremor of a hand holding a coffee cup, vulnerability disguised as composure. It was a subtle victory. But in corporate warfare, subtlety often beats overt action. People remember the silent moments, the unspoken shifts in power. They remember who was unseen but omnipresent. That evening, as I walked to my apartment, city lights reflecting off wet streets, I felt the weight of the day. The ripple was moving, but it was unpredictable. Allies could falter, enemies could retaliate, and in a world where one mistake could undo weeks of work, the responsibility pressed down on me like the humid August air. Yet, amid the tension, I felt something else, a thrill. I was no longer just surviving this corporate battlefield. I was shaping it, moving pieces, setting currents, watching waves form. The office was no longer a place of mindless labor, it was my stage. My chessboard, my proving ground. Tomorrow, I would escalate. Phase 2 required boldness, courage, and precise timing. I would test boundaries, watch reactions, and tighten the noose, not just around Rick, but around the structures that had allowed him to thrive unchecked. And through it all, I reminded myself, this is not personal. It's professional justice. It's about accountability. It's about visibility, mine and everyone else's who had been silenced. As I entered my apartment, I paused, staring out at the skyline. A storm had begun in Midtown. Invisible but powerful, and like all storms, it would change the landscape. I smiled faintly, whispering to myself, the ripple has begun. And it's unstoppable. The tension in the office had become palpable, like electricity humming just beneath the surface. I could feel it in every glance, every half smile, every hurried step of my colleagues. But the real test wasn't the whispers or the silent fear. It was the moment when the target of my silent revolution would finally acknowledge my presence. Rick. I saw him that morning, striding toward the conference room for the first big meeting since the ripple began. His usual swagger had been replaced by a cautious, measured gait. Even his tie, always perfectly knotted, looked slightly askew, as if the stress had begun to leak through his carefully constructed armor. I stayed near the back, letting him dominate the room, letting him believe he was still in control. But control is an illusion, one I had learned to manipulate. As he launched into his speech, I noticed the subtle hesitations, the cracks in his tone. He was aware something had shifted, and I was the shadow behind it. Simone, he said suddenly, catching my eye across the room. There was a challenge in his voice now, a thinly veiled accusation. My pulse quickened, but I kept my composure. Yes, Rick, my tone was calm, deliberate. You've changed the dynamics around here. People are talking, questioning decisions, challenging authority. Care to explain? His gaze was sharp, predatory. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that holds both warmth and warning. I'm just trying to make sure everyone's voices are heard. That's all. Transparency, accountability, things we all benefit from. He leaned back slightly, trying to mask the uncertainty. Be careful, Simone. Challenging the system can be dangerous. Dangerous? I echoed softly. Or transformative? My eyes held his, steady, unwavering. The room felt suspended in that moment, as if everyone else had disappeared, leaving only the two of us in a private arena. The confrontation didn't explode in anger or shouting. No, it was subtle, psychological, a battle of presence, of perception. I let him talk, watched him flail slightly, giving just enough to show he was rattled. Every word he spoke, every calculated pause, revealed his fear of losing the control he had wielded so arrogantly for years. After the meeting, I walked through the hallways with purpose. Colleagues whispered, glances lingered longer than usual. I could feel the shift, see the ripple moving outward from our confrontation. Rick's allies were uncertain now. Hesitation had replaced blind loyalty. And me? I was no longer the unseen observer. I had stepped into the light, fully aware that visibility comes with risk and power. Later that day, in my office, I reviewed the outcomes in my mind. Phase 1 was complete. The ripple had become a wave. But I also knew the confrontation was just the beginning. Rick would adapt, strategize, retaliate, and I had to be ready. I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting the hum of the city seep through the glass. The exhilaration was intoxicating, yes, but so was the tension. The thrill of knowing that I had shaken the foundations of a corporate empire without firing a single shot. Without raising my voice. And in that quiet moment, I made a promise to myself. The game had only just begun. I would continue to move unseen, strike strategically, and watch as the structures of power cracked under the weight of accountability. Every subtle action, every carefully calculated move, was a step toward justice, and toward the ultimate revelation that no empire built on fear could withstand the courage of those who refused to stay silent. The ripple was now a current, and I was steering it, unwavering, unstoppable. I could feel it in the air, the tension, the anticipation, the collective energy of everyone waiting for something to happen. Today wasn't just another Monday, another meeting. Today was the reckoning, and I was ready. As I stepped into the conference hall, the chatter dimmed to whispers. Rick's smug confidence had returned, the mask of control firmly in place. But beneath it, I sensed unease, the subtle tremor of someone realizing the ground was shifting beneath them. The board, the executives, even the interns, everyone was watching, waiting. Rick started with the usual bravado, projecting confidence as he presented charts, numbers, and projections. But I wasn't here to argue metrics. I was here to expose the cracks, the lies, the silences that had allowed a toxic culture to fester. And I would do it with clarity, precision, and unflinching calm. When the moment came, I raised my hand, and all eyes turned to me. "Excuse me, Rick," I said, my voice steady, controlled, carrying just enough authority to silence the room. "I think there's something everyone here needs to hear." There was a pause, heavy, electric, and I let it linger. Then I began, detailing the issues we'd all witnessed, the decisions made behind closed doors, the culture of fear that had been cultivated. I spoke not just for myself, but for every colleague whose voice had been suppressed, whose ideas had been dismissed, whose contributions had been stolen. Rick tried to interrupt, tried to regain control, but each attempt only made the room lean in closer. Every fact, every example I presented chipped away at the facade he'd spent years constructing. And I could feel the shift, board members exchanging glances, colleagues nodding, the energy in the room tilting toward accountability. I ended with a simple truth. Leadership isn't about fear. It's about integrity, transparency, and respect. And if we can't embody that, then change isn't just necessary, it's inevitable. A silence followed, palpable, almost suffocating. Then, slowly, the applause began. Not loud, not overwhelming, but meaningful, deliberate. One by one, people stood, some hesitant, some resolute, until the room was buzzing with a collective affirmation. I had broken the spell. I had taken the first step toward a cultural shift, a wave of accountability that couldn't be ignored. And in that moment, I saw it, the flicker of fear, the unmistakable acknowledgement in Rick's eyes. He realized he could no longer dominate through intimidation. He realized that transparency and courage had real power. And I realized something, too. This wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for everyone who had been silenced, overlooked, underestimated. I stepped back, letting the room settle. My pulse raced, my heart full, but my mind clear. The public confrontation had been the catalyst. Now it was time to sustain the change, to ensure the wave I'd started became a tide that couldn't be turned back. True power isn't taken, it's claimed through courage, persistence, and integrity. Standing up in the face of fear isn't easy, but it's transformative. Your voice matters, your presence matters, and one act of courage can ripple through an entire organization, a community, even a life. If this story resonates with you, like this video to show your support for courage and accountability. Share it with your friends and colleagues. Let's inspire a movement of change. And comment below with your story of standing up. No matter how small, you never know who might need to hear it today. I didn't expect the aftermath to be quiet. Change rarely whispers, it roars. The day after the showdown, I walked through the office. And something was different. People didn't avoid my gaze. They didn't shuffle papers or pretend meetings didn't matter. Instead, there was a hum of purpose. A new rhythm of energy. Subtle but undeniable. I passed by the break room and caught snippets of conversation, small, cautious victories. "Did you see her presentation? I can't believe she called him out like that." Finally, someone speaking the truth. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten. Not because the battle was over, but because the foundation of something stronger had been laid. The board had requested a follow-up meeting to discuss reforms. Policies that had once seemed untouchable, opaque decision-making, favoritism, silencing dissent, were suddenly on the table. I spoke up again, this time not as the lone challenger, but as part of a growing chorus. We drafted clearer accountability structures, implemented channels for transparent communication, and began mentoring programs that actually valued every voice. But it wasn't just about policy. It was about culture. And culture isn't dictated, it's lived. Every day, in every interaction, I noticed my team walking a little taller, smiling a little brighter, engaging in meetings with confidence instead of hesitation. The interns who had once cowered now offered insights that sparked real conversations. People began to trust that their work mattered, and that trust changed everything. I didn't see Rick much after that. He lingered in his office, the empire he'd built on fear quietly cracking. Eventually, he resigned, the official story cloaked in personal reasons. But I knew better. Power based on intimidation is fragile. And when integrity steps in, it crumbles. And for the first time, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. Revenge had its satisfaction, but empowerment, that lasting transformation, that was something else entirely. Walking out of the building that evening, the sunset poured through the glass windows, reflecting off the polished floors. I paused for a moment, listening to the distant hum of the city, feeling the pulse of life beyond corporate walls. I realized the truth. Leadership, courage, and integrity aren't just strategies, they're choices. And choosing them, day after day, is what creates real, sustainable change. I thought about all the people who had supported me silently, who had risked their own comfort to do what was right. I thought about the moments I doubted myself, the nights I lay awake wondering if standing up was worth it. And I understood, deeply, that every act of courage matters. Every voice that refuses to be silenced echoes louder than we can imagine. True empowerment comes not from defeating someone else, but from lifting yourself and others. Courage isn't a one-time act, it's a commitment to integrity, to fairness, to speaking up even when it's uncomfortable. And when we choose to lead with values instead of fear, we create change that outlasts any one battle. If Simone's journey resonates with you, like this video to celebrate courage and accountability. Share it with someone who needs inspiration to speak their truth. And comment your story below. What's one moment you stood up? Or plan to, despite the fear? Let's build a community that lifts each other up. Together.